You're about to make a catastrophic mistake right now, today, probably within the next few hours. Someone is going to ask you to do something that feels harmless, maybe even noble. You're going to want to say yes, because saying yes makes you feel like a good person. And that single yes is going to cost you in ways you won't recognize music until it's too late to undo the damage. Here's what nobody tells you. There are 5 specific things that once you do them for someone, fundamentally alter the power dynamic between you in ways you can never fully reverse. These aren't small favors. These aren't acts of kindness. These are transfers of power disguised as generosity. Music. And the moment you complete them, you've permanently weakened your position while strengthening theirs. Machiavelli spent decades watching people destroy themselves doing exactly these 5 things. Not because they were stupid or weak, but because they didn't understand the irreversible nature of what they were doing. They thought they were being helpful. They were actually giving away leverage they could never get back. And once that leverage was gone, the relationship transformed from equal partnership to subtle domination with them on the losing end. I'm going to show you the 5 things Machiavelli observed that you should never do for anyone. Not your boss, not your friends, not your family, not your romantic partner. Each one seems reasonable in isolation. Each one destroys your position permanently. And if you're doing even one of them right now, you need to stop immediately before the damage becomes irreversible. But first, I need you to understand the psychological mechanism that makes these 5 things so dangerous. It's not that they're inherently bad acts. It's that they create dependency, obligation, and power asymmetry that cannot be undone. Once you've done them, the other person's expectations have permanently shifted. They now view you as someone who provides this thing, and attempting to stop providing it feels like you're withdrawing something that belongs to them. Watch how this operates in any relationship where power dynamics have shifted. The person who always pays starts to be expected to always pay. The person who always solves problems becomes responsible for solving all problems. The person who always accommodates becomes the one who must always accommodate. These patterns don't develop through explicit negotiation. They develop through repeated actions that set expectations, which then solidify into unspoken rules. The 5 things I'm about to describe are particularly dangerous because they don't just set expectations. They transfer fundamental power and create dependency that cannot be reversed without destroying the relationship entirely. Once you've given these things, you cannot take them back. You can only refuse to do them in the first place. Last warning. If you're currently doing any of these 5 things for someone, what comes next is going to make you deeply uncomfortable because you'll realize you've already made the mistake, and reversing course will be painful. But understanding the mistake is the first step towards stopping it before it completely destroys your position. Number 1. Never lend them money. This is the most obvious one. And yet, people violate it constantly, thinking their situation is somehow different. It's not. Lending money to someone you have an ongoing relationship with fundamentally corrupts that relationship in ways that cannot be repaired, even if the money gets paid back. Here's what happens. The moment you lend money, the power dynamic shifts immediately. You're now creditor, they're debtor. Every interaction from that point forward is colored by this fact, whether either of you acknowledges it or not. They owe you, which means they're in a position of obligation and often resentment. You're owed, which means you're in a position of expectation and often frustration. Watch how this plays out. You lend money to a friend who's struggling. They promise to pay you back in 3 months. 3 months pass, no music payment, no mention of it. You don't want to be the who brings it up, so you don't. But now, every time you music interact with them, you're thinking about the money. Every time they spend money on something else, you're noticing. Every time they suggest doing something that costs money, you're thinking, maybe pay me back first. Meanwhile, they're aware you're aware they owe you money, which makes every interaction uncomfortable for them. They start avoiding you because seeing you reminds them of the debt. Or they get defensive about their financial choices because they feel judged. Or they convince themselves you don't actually need the money back since you were able to lend it music in the first place, transforming the loan into a gift in their mind without your consent. The relationship is now permanently damaged. If they never pay you back, music, you've lost money and respect for them. If they do pay you back, the relationship still carries the residue of the period where they owed you. Either way, music, the easy equality you had before the loan, is gone forever. Machiavelli watched this pattern destroy alliances between princes who lent money to other princes. The debtor prince always came to resent the creditor prince, music, because debt is humiliating. The creditor prince always came to view the debtor prince, music, as unreliable or entitled. Even when debts were repaid, music, the alliances never fully recovered because the power asymmetry of debt had revealed the relationship's transactional foundation. But here's the part that makes this truly toxic. Lending money doesn't just damage the relationship. It often doesn't even help the person you lent to. Someone in financial crisis who needs to borrow money from friends usually has deeper financial problems that a loan doesn't solve. Your funding continued dysfunction. They blow through your money, end up in the same situation months later, and now you're both worse off than if you'd refused initially. The only winning move is to never lend money to anyone you have an ongoing relationship with. If someone you care about needs money and music you can afford to help, you have two options. Give them the money as a gift with absolutely no expectation of repayment, music, or refuse entirely. Giving as a gift means genuinely writing it off the moment you hand it over. If they never mention it again, you're fine, music, with that. If they use it in ways you wouldn't approve, you're fine with that. If it doesn't solve their problem, you're fine with that. You gave a gift, they received it, transaction complete. Most people can't actually do this. They say they're giving a gift, but emotionally they're still expecting repayment or proper use or gratitude. This creates all the same problems as lending without the explicit agreement that might actually result in repayment. It's the worst of both options. So, the clean move is never lend money to anyone you have ongoing relationship with. Not friends, not family, music, not romantic partners, not colleagues. The financial help you think you're providing isn't worth the permanent corruption of the relationship. And if you can't afford to gift the money with genuinely zero strings attached, you can't afford to help financially. Music. Number 2, never make yourself completely available to them. The second thing you must never do is make yourself completely available to someone whenever they want your time, attention, music, or presence. This seems harsh. It's actually self-preservation because complete availability doesn't, music, create gratitude or closeness. It creates contempt and exploitation. Here's the psychological mechanism. Humans value scarcity, music, and devalue abundance. This isn't a moral failing. It's how our brains assess worth. Things that are freely and constantly available register as low value. Things that are scarce register as high value. Your time and attention follow the same rules. When you make yourself completely available to someone, you're communicating that your time has no competing demands, music, which means it has low value. You're always free when they call. You always adjust your schedule to accommodate theirs. You always say yes when they want to see you. You drop what you're doing when they need something. What you think this communicates? I value you and our relationship. What it actually, music, communicates. I have nothing more important than whatever you want, which means I'm not important or valuable. The person receiving your complete availability, music, doesn't feel valued. They feel like they're interacting with someone who has no life, no priorities, no boundaries. Watch what happens over time. They start calling or texting with less and less regard for your schedule because they've learned your schedule is infinitely flexible. They cancel or reschedule without much concern because they've learned you'll always accommodate. They make demands on your time that they'd never make on someone whose time, music, they actually respected. And here's the really toxic part. They start resenting you for your availability. This seems backwards, but it's consistent. Music. When someone has complete access to something, they take it for granted and simultaneously feel pressured by its constant presence. Your always being available starts to feel like pressure to include you, obligation to respond to you, burdened to manage your expectations. Machiavelli observed that princes who made themselves too accessible to their subjects lost respect and authority. The music prince, who was always available for petitions and requests, got overwhelmed with trivial demands while being perceived as weak. The prince, who had limited scheduled access times for audiences, was respected, and the time granted was valued because it was scarce. Your relationships operate identically. The friend who's always available gets taken for granted. The romantic partner who's always free gets valued less than the partner who has rich, independent life. The colleague who always says yes to meetings gets their time treated as worthless, while the colleague music who's selective about meetings gets their time treated as valuable. The pattern is universal. Complete availability signals low value. Selective availability signals high value. This is true even in intimate relationships where you'd think availability would be valued. The romantic partner who has no life outside the relationship becomes boring and suffocating. The romantic partner who maintains independent interests and friendships remains interesting and desirable. So you must maintain scarcity of your time and attention, music, with everyone in your life, not as a manipulation tactic, but as genuine boundaries that music reflect that you have priorities beyond any single relationship. You're not always free because you have work, interests, other relationships, personal time that you protect. This doesn't mean being distant or unavailable. It means being selective. You're available when you genuinely want to be and when it fits your schedule, not whenever someone else wants you to be. You have times when you're accessible and times when you're not. You say no to things that don't fit your priorities without guilt or extensive justification. The result is that the time and attention you do give valued because it's music, not infinite. The relationship improves because you're interacting from genuine desire rather than from obligation or lack of alternatives. And you maintain your own life rather than dissolving it into complete availability for someone else. Number 3, never take full responsibility for their problems. The third thing you must never do is take ownership of someone else's problems by making their issues your responsibility to solve. This is subtle because helping someone with a problem is fine. Taking responsibility for solving their problems is catastrophic. Here's the distinction. Helping is doing something supportive while they maintain responsibility for the problem. Taking responsibility is making their music problem yours, which means you're now responsible for the solution and the outcome. Watch how this happens. Someone you care about has a problem. Music could be financial, could be relationship drama, could be career issue, could be anything. You help initially in reasonable ways. Give advice, offer support, maybe assist with specific tasks. This is fine. But then they don't solve the problem. They keep struggling with it. You get more involved. You start doing more. You start feeling responsible for fixing this for them because you've become emotionally invested in the outcome. You've now, music, crossed the line from helping to taking responsibility. Once you've taken responsibility, several toxic things happen immediately. First, they stop taking responsibility. Why would they, music, when you've taken it? Your involvement has actually reduced their motivation to solve their own problem because you're handling it. Second, you can't, music, actually solve it. It's their problem embedded in their life circumstances, their choices, their patterns. You can influence it, but you can't fix it because you don't control all the variables, which means you've taken responsibility for something you cannot actually deliver on. Third, when the problem doesn't get solved despite your involvement, you get blamed either directly or through their disappointment and resentment. You took responsibility. The problem persists. Music, therefore you failed. Never mind that it was their problem in the first place. Fourth, even if you do somehow solve this problem, you've established a pattern where you solve their problems. The next problem that arises, they come to you. You're now the designated problem solver for their life, which is a position of enormous burden and zero reward. Machiavelli watched advisors destroy themselves this way. Music. The prince has a problem. The advisor takes responsibility for solving it. Either the problem doesn't get solved and the advisor music gets blamed, or it does get solved and the advisor is now responsible for solving all future problems. Either way, the advisor has converted themselves from valued counsel to responsible music servant. The pattern appears everywhere. The parent who takes responsibility for their adult child's music problems creates a dependent adult who never learns to solve their own issues. The friend who takes responsibility for another friend's relationship drama gets sucked into endless involvement, while the friend with the drama never actually fixes their relationship patterns. The manager who takes responsibility for their employees' performance issues enables music, continued poor performance, while taking on burden that should belong to the employee. The only sustainable approach is you, music, can help. You cannot take responsibility. You can offer advice, resources, support. You cannot make their problem your problem. They must maintain responsibility for music, their issue, and for implementing solutions. This requires discipline, because watching someone you care about struggle with a problem you think you could solve is psychologically difficult. Your instinct is to step in and fix it. This instinct will destroy you if you act on it, because you'll end up responsible for outcomes you can't control in situations you don't own. Instead, you help them develop the capacity to solve their own problems. You don't solve problems for them. You help them solve problems themselves. You provide support, not rescue. You maintain the boundary that their problems are theirs, even when you care about them and their outcomes. Number 4, never defend them when they're clearly wrong. The fourth thing you must never do is defend someone when they're clearly in the wrong. This seems disloyal. It's actually the only way to maintain both integrity, music, and useful relationship. Here's what happens when you defend someone who's clearly wrong. First, you damage your own credibility. Everyone, music, can see they're wrong. When you defend them anyway, you look either dishonest or blind. Either you know they're wrong and you're lying, or you can't see they're wrong. Music, which means your judgment is compromised. Either way, your credibility takes the hit. Second, music, you enable their continued bad behavior. If everyone confronts them about being wrong, but you defend them, you've given them cover to not examine their behavior. You've provided the support they need to continue doing the wrong thing because at least someone is on their side. Third, you create moral obligation where you have to continue defending increasingly indefensible music positions. Once you've defended them when they were slightly wrong, consistency pressure means you have to defend them when they're very wrong. You get locked, music, into a pattern of defense that escalates with their behavior. Fourth, they lose respect for you. Deep down, they know they're wrong. When you defend them anyway, they learn that your support isn't based on truth or principle. It's based on blind loyalty. This means your opinions and judgments carry no weight because they know you'll support them regardless of merit. Music, Machiavelli observed this in political alliances. The ally who defended their partner's unjust wars lost credibility with other nations while enabling their partner's worst tendencies. When the ally finally refused to support an indefensible action, the relationship collapsed. Music entirely because it had been built on unconditional support rather than principled partnership. The healthy alternative is you support people when they're right. You decline to support them when they're wrong, and you tell them privately when music you think they're making a mistake. This maintains both the relationship and your integrity. When they're clearly right and being attacked, you defend them vigorously. When they're clearly wrong, you don't defend them. You either stay silent or you acknowledge privately that you can't support them in this. When they ask for your opinion, you give it honestly, even when it contradicts what they want to hear. This seems risky to the relationship. Actually, it's the foundation of a relationship that can last because it's based on mutual respect for truth rather than on blind loyalty. Music. The person who knows you'll tell them the truth trusts your input in ways they can't trust the input of someone who always agrees with them. Number 5. Never sacrifice your core interests, music, for their benefit. The 5th and most important thing you must never do is sacrifice your fundamental interests, music, or needs for someone else's benefit. Not your career for their convenience. Not your financial security for their comfort. Not your core values for their approval, not your essential well-being for their preferences. This is where most people completely destroy themselves because they've been taught that sacrifice for others is the highest virtue. It's not sustainable. Sacrifice comes from surplus. Sacrifice from your core needs creates resentment, depletion, and eventual collapse of the relationship. Here's what happens when you sacrifice core interests. Initially, it feels noble. You're putting someone else first. You're showing how much you care. You're being selfless. This feels good temporarily because you've been conditioned to associate self-sacrifice with virtue. But you've just established, music, a precedent that your core interests are negotiable when they conflict with someone else's preferences. They learn that if they need something badly enough, you'll sacrifice yourself to music, provide it. This creates incentive structure where your interests always lose when there's conflict. Over time, your sacrificed core interests compound into resentment. You can't actually sustain sacrificing what you fundamentally need. You, music, gave up the career opportunity for them. You gave up financial security for them. You compromised your values for them. And eventually, you start keeping score of everything you've sacrificed. The relationship becomes a ledger of your sacrifices versus their inadequate appreciation. Meanwhile, they haven't necessarily asked you to sacrifice these things. You volunteered the sacrifices, but now you resent them for sacrifices you chose, creating dynamic where they're blamed for choices you made. Machiavelli watched princes sacrifice core interests for alliances that fell apart anyway. The prince who sacrificed military security for an ally's trade benefit ended up with neither security nor trade when the alliance collapsed. The prince who protected core interests while being generous from surplus maintained both strength and reliable alliances. The distinction is critical. You can be generous from surplus. You cannot sacrifice from necessity. You can help others after your core needs are met. Music. You cannot help others by destroying your own foundation. Core interests are your physical and mental health, your financial security, your career development, your core values and principles, your music, essential relationships. These are non-negotiable. You protect these first, always, with everyone. From the surplus beyond these core interests, you can be generous, helpful, sacrificial even, but the core stays protected. Someone needs financial help. You can help from your surplus, never from your security. Someone needs your time. You can give from your discretionary time, never from time needed for your health or essential work. This seems selfish. It's actually the foundation of sustainable relationships. You cannot maintain healthy relationship from a position of depleted core interests. You become resentful, exhausted, music bitter. The relationship corrupts. When you protect your core interests first, you can be genuinely generous from abundance rather than resentfully sacrificial from depletion. The relationship improves because you're giving from genuine surplus rather than from obligation or guilt. These 5 music things, lending money, complete availability, taking responsibility for their problems, defending them when they're wrong, sacrificing your core interests, seem like music acts of loyalty or love. They're actually transfers of power and dignity that permanently weaken your position while creating unsustainable expectations. Never lend money. Never make yourself completely available. Never take responsibility for their problems. Never defend them when they're clearly wrong. Never sacrifice your core interests for their benefit. These boundaries seem harsh until you understand that maintaining them is what makes genuine relationship possible. The person who violates all 5 of these boundaries ends up depleted, resentful, and disrespected. The person who maintains these boundaries creates relationships based on mutual respect, reciprocity, and genuine choice rather than obligation. Machiavelli was right. Some things you never do for anyone, not because you don't care, but because doing them destroys both you and the relationship. Protect these boundaries ruthlessly. Your life depends music on it.